Hey, with you Evening Story Channel, I post new interesting stories every day. Subscribe and click the bell to not miss it.
Recently, James' life has been in a non-stop black streak. He was forced to quit his job at a large supermarket where he worked as a security guard. A series of thefts were committed on his shift. The thieves managed to take goods from the shelves of the store in broad daylight undetected. James at that time left his post to make a very important call just for a couple of minutes. But the director did not listen to his excuses and immediately pointed to the door. In his personal life is also all hopelessly bad. Just recently, his girlfriend Nancy left him. She left for a banal reason common among modern women of the fair sex. You don't know how to make money. You're a loser. Nancy reprimanded him. I don't want to live a miserable existence with you. James felt sick to his stomach. He is so tired of people's betrayal that he decides to make his life easier and get a job as a guard at the cemetery. Here, at least, human contact is minimized. And that's just what he needs now. But there was a problem. The guard was only needed for the night shift, and James had a small part-time job on the computer. So he wanted to sleep at night so he could be productive during the day. James decided to cheat a little. There was no need to personally monitor the cemetery on a minute-by-minute basis. After all, the dead will not get out of their graves and run away. Just like in the supermarket, you can limit yourself to video surveillance. The man checked the video camera works properly. He attached a sensor to the camera, and the sensor is in communication with the phone. If the sensor detects unusual movement, the phone will immediately signal, "I think I've got it all figured out. Now we can go to sleep," James thought. Comfortably, he settled down on the couch and closed his eyes. But his sleep did not last long. The man woke up to dust. The end of the phone with difficulty realized that it was the sensor of the gentleman triggered. "What could have happened in the cemetery?" exclaimed James, and at the same second was stunned with horror. Through the video camera, he saw a girl standing next to one of the graves. Her silhouette was clearly illuminated by the moonlight. His hands went cold, his feet cold. He knew for a fact that there were no people in the cemetery at this time. So it was a dead man, whispered James silently. He had never been superstitious, but now he was really scared. Suddenly, after a moment, the girl turned around and looked directly into the camera. Her gaze threw James into a cold sweat. Without feeling his legs, he ran toward the grave where the stranger was standing. In a few seconds, James came running to the spot, but the girl was gone. He felt uneasy. And to distract himself from heavy thoughts, he began to look at the photo on the monument. The photo showed a young, smiling girl. Suddenly something clicked in James' head, and he realized that the girl in the photo and the one standing at the grave were the same person. So the man thought, "Oh no, she couldn't have crawled out of the grave, could she? There's no such thing. It's nonsense. It's just silly to think about." James tried to calm himself down, but he couldn't. He was shaking with fear and cursing himself for taking this job. He went back to his cell and looked into the video camera. Everything was fine. And suddenly it hit him. I fell asleep. Oh my God, I must have dreamed the whole thing. How stupid am I? James felt relieved and decided to drink a cup of coffee to wake up and regain consciousness. His sleep was already gone. Just as he was about to bring the cup to his lips, there was a knock at the door. There was a knock at the door of his den. James scurried around the small room like a cliff on a chain and didn't know what to do. Oh, the thoughts were running chaotically through his head. What nightmare? No, I wasn't dreaming. If this keeps up, I won't live to see the morning. My heart will just clench with fear and give out. Yeah, pull yourself together. You're a man after all. James pulled himself together, grabbed a nearby stick just in case, and headed for the door. I opened the door and was stunned. On the threshold stood the very same girl. She pleaded with her, looking at him with big frightened eyes. She was shrunken with cold. "I'm sorry, I'm very cold. The bus to town won't be until morning. Can I play at your place for a while and leave right away?" asked the stranger. "Yes, of course." Stunned James, not expecting such a question. "Didn't you know how to ask a man who is not dead?" The girl guessed. "No, my sister is buried here. She and I look very much alike, or rather, we're similar." The girl sank tiredly into a chair. It was obvious that she was upset and worried about something. James offered her tea. She didn't refuse. She greedily nibbled her lips on the hot tea. "My name is James. What's yours?" the guard asked, trying to keep the conversation going. Kate quietly answered the unexpected guest, looking around. "What's wrong with you?" asked James. "Are you scared of something?" "Share it, it will be easier." The girl stared at the guard. He seemed good-natured and friendly to her. "You see, I didn't know where to start, Kate. I'm scared. I'm very scared. I'm being followed." James's eyes widened in surprise. "What kind of day is this?" "It's like a mystery thriller." The girl seems to be in over her head. "No friends, acting like the town crazy. She says she's scared, and she came to the cemetery at night." James thought to himself, but out loud he asked who was following you. Kate looked away, hesitant to answer. Her indecision was getting to be too much. James couldn't bear the pause and said, "You know what the biggest flaw in most women is? They make up problems out of nothing. You have that flaw. If you're being stalked, you should go to the police instead of messing with yourself and others. I'm being stalked by my own father. He died 10 years ago. So the police won't help," Kate replied. James was even more surprised. "She's crazy. How can the dead be haunted?" Kate noticed the confusion in James's eyes. If he knew how familiar that look was to her. It's the look people give her when they think she's crazy, the kind of look that says she's in a mental institution. She was tired of proving that she wasn't. Her thoughts were interrupted by James. "You say your father's stalking you. How do you dream about him?" "No, he's always with me, in my head and in my heart. He calls me to him all the time, as if he's commanding Anna's heart. And she's gone. I don't want to. I dream of a family and children. Why don't you go to your father's grave more often and then go to church to pray for him?" "My grandmother always said that God helps. When my grandfather died, she dreamt about him a lot, so my grandmother turned to God, and the grandfather never bothered her again." Kate only shook her head in annoyance and said, "If you knew how many times I went to church, prayed, confessed, and received communion, traveled to holy places. The Baityushka of the local parish said that my father's soul is out of place. It wanders lonely and cannot find rest." James felt sorry for her. Kate too wanted to help her, but he didn't know how. "What did your father die of?" asked James, suddenly switching to you. The girl was so sincere, direct, that the man immediately sympathized with her. "No, not from illness. He died tragically while fishing with 2 friends. The boat was swept away by the current and overturned. The bodies of the friends were found in the remains of the boat and the father." "No, they didn't. The police and volunteers have been looking for him for a long time, but no results. We buried an empty coffin." Kate took a handkerchief out of her pocket and wiped away the tears that suddenly came to her eyes. "Did you love your father?" James asked. "Yes, of course I did. I still do. He raised us alone. Mom died during Anna's labor. My father always said that we were family, and that there was a strong, invisible thread between us that no one could break." The time passed very quickly as they talked. Before they knew it, dawn was breaking. Kate looked at her watch and said to James, "I have to go. The first bus will be here soon. Thanks for sheltering me, keeping me warm." The man caught himself thinking that he didn't want to part with Kate and could give her his phone number. Suddenly there will be a desire to call sometimes. "Yes, all right," the girl agreed, and after a couple of seconds she handed James a sheet with the number. The man had no time to recover from the unexpected meeting, as in the cell, his partner Alex, the day watchman, came in. "Hey, buddy. How was your shift?" he asked and shook James' hand. "It was fine, no accidents." James replied grudgingly. He had no desire to share with his partner what had happened tonight, especially since Alex liked to make fun of others. And James didn't like that. "No accidents, you say?" Alex didn't stop. "And the tea is straight from 3 cups on me cut. There's a woman's lipstick lying around. Wow. Looking at you, I would never have thought you're here. Don't bring women." He doesn't like that. "You'll be out of a job in no time." James jumped out of the den like a thief caught stealing. He didn't think about his day job on the computer anymore. Kate was on his mind. He remembered her big bottomless eyes begging for help. James admitted to himself that he wanted to see Kate again. They say love comes suddenly. I think it did, James thought, admitting to himself that he thought of Kate as more than just a person in need of help. The next day, he decided to call her. "Kate, hello." He was glad to hear a familiar voice on the phone. "Could we meet today?" "Hi, yes, we can," Kate answered. As always, quiet and sad. "Great." Then in Central Park at 12 o'clock, James rushed to the date like a boy, carefully carrying a bouquet of yellow chrysanthemums. Maybe the flowers would make her happy just a little bit. Kate arrived on time. She was living in the cold wind. Every now and then, hiding her hands in the pockets of her thin coat, her unruly curly hair whipped out from under the ticket. When she saw the flowers, she smiled, hiding the long-standing sadness in the corners of her eyes. "Maybe a cup of coffee," James suggested, seeing that Kate was dressed decidedly out of season. "Yes," she agreed eagerly. "How are things with your father?" James asked, when they were cozily seated at a table in the cafe. "I had a dream about my father today, calling me to him. He said he was alive, alive, but he needed help. He can't come to me by himself. And he disappeared as suddenly as he'd appeared." The girl spoke excitedly. "Listen, Kate. Let's try to find your father. Probably only then your heart and soul will calm down. You'll both find each other again. People find each other even 20 years after a breakup." Kate nodded silently. James looked at the girl meaningfully and said, "Let's start our search at the place where the boat sank. My intuition tells me that there we can find the beginning of the thread that leads to your father. James, thank you for helping me out. Without you, I couldn't have done anything and I'd be as lost as my sister." Kate felt sorry for me. Tears glistened in her eyes. "Of course I'll be with you," said James, and shook Kate's hand firmly in his, realizing that he was falling more and more in love with her. It's unbelievable, but it was. Kate's natural beauty, her sincerity, her directness, had a magical effect on him. She was definitely not like all the other girls who had ever appeared on his path. Not mercantile, not rude, not spoiled. She possesses an attraction bordering on groundedness. Say it's easy to find a father, but it's hard to do, especially if a dozen years have passed since the disappearance of the person. The next day, the young people set off, having traveled more than 2 hours in an electric train and almost an hour on foot. They came to the bank of the river, where, according to Kate's words, the fisherman had died. Some gut feeling told her this was the right place. "So what do we do next? Give me a hint, Father." Kate shouted in desperation. The cry was so shrill that James even flinched and shrugged. They started down the forest path, without fully realizing where they were going. Then the path began to narrow until it became a narrow strip. "It's going to get confusing," James said, glancing apprehensively at the time on his cell phone and the rapidly disappearing percentage of charge. If they kept going like this, they risked being left in the woods without shelter for the night or communication with the outside world. Besides, it was getting colder by the evening. The prospect of freezing in the forest was not a pleasant one. James and Katia were nearly collapsing from exhaustion. Finally, they saw that the trees in the distance were becoming much smaller, and they could see significant glimpses of the forest. "Have we really reached a settlement?" James rejoiced, and immediately shook off the remnants of despondency and hopelessness. And exactly after a few minutes, they realized that they had acquired a half-abandoned village. "Lord, make someone live in it," the young people thought at the same time. And at the same moment, they saw a villager walking slowly down the only street. His figure had almost disappeared in the distance. "Hey, wait, what of the force?" shouted James, and gathering the rest of his strength, ran after him. The stranger looked back. It was an old man about 80 years old with a wrinkled face. "How fast are you going?" "Barely caught up with you," said James, out of breath. "Say, this is an old story, of course, but you must have lived here a long time. 10 years ago, fishermen drowned in this area. They found the bodies of 2 of them, but no third. Maybe you or your compatriots found a dead or alive man about 45 years old. I can't tell you. I don't remember. Do you want to see Ethan? He's got an almost photographic memory, a lot of abilities. He's a psychic witch doctor, too. If anyone's ever been found here, they've certainly never escaped his eyes. He lives in the farthest house over there." "Thank you sincerely," thanked James. Suddenly there was hope. What if Kate's father still lived in this village? They walked forward. There were locks on the doors of many of the houses. The shutters on the windows were closed and boarded up. Yes, the village is dying out, James thought. but there was still life in a few houses. In the yard sued old-fashioned, dressed women ran dogs, even flashed a couple of children. Finally, the young men reached the farthest house. At that moment, its door swung open and an elderly man with a long gray beard and the same gray hair stepped out into the street. Like everyone in the village, he wore simple clothes of coarse cloth. Kate instantly stepped towards him, but the question still died on her lips as she faced the old man's gaze across the gravity-looking eyes, staring intently at her and as if to shine through like an X-ray. "Don't say anything." The elder put a finger to his lips. "I've already counted everything from you. You are your father's daughter. You are both as strong as iron bars and can sense each other from a distance. Your sister, on the other hand, is weaker. It's a pity. You're strong enough to handle it. You were wrong about one thing. He's not after you. No. Father wants to find you again. He can only do that through an invisible kinship because he's lost his human memory. I found him on the banks of the Suniva River, unconscious, with a bloody head. I thought he was dead. Only God and healing herbs were able to breathe life into him again. But the memory had to be left to the mercy of the Almighty." Kate and James listened to the elder, holding their breath and listening to his every word. Only the girl's heart was pounding frantically, and it seemed that it was about to jump out. And the elder continued his unhurried story. "I asked him to stay, to live in the village, but he did not agree. He felt that he had relatives. He wanted to find them. 10 years have passed like a day, and his heart and soul are still aching like yours. You will find each other. That day will come soon. Where should I look for his grandfather?" Kate begged. "Sweet girl, I have some powers, but not enough to tell you exactly where your father is. All I can see is that there's a call and gathering of people not far from you. That's all. There's nothing more I can tell you. I can give you shelter and food for the night. And when the dawn breaks, go with God." It was barely morning. Kate and James set off on their return journey. The impression of what they had seen and heard was so strong that in their minds and hearts, it was the dilapidated villages. And the words of the elder Ethan remained forever. The young people realized that they were on the right path. Very soon there will be a reunion of two destinies of two close people, and thus the souls and hearts of Kate and her father will find peace. The girl kept repeating the words of the elder, calling and gathering people. "James, where could it be? What does the father work as?" James wrinkles his forehead. No way could he come up with a reasonable explanation. Suddenly a smile lit up his face. He slapped himself lightly on the forehead. "Well, of course, Kate, your father must be working at the church with a lantern. Are you sure, James?" "Yeah, I have no doubts. Ringing the bell and gathering people for the church service. Just like the old man predicted. We don't have that many churches. We'll find him quickly. Let's start looking today." "Let's not put it off until tomorrow," Kate asked. James was tired as hell from the turmoil of impressions that had descended on him in the last few days. But it was a pleasant tiredness, especially since his life had changed completely and irrevocably during those days. "I agree, Kate. Of course you do." Today was unusually cold for early fall, and by late afternoon, the gusts of piercing wind had intensified. Kate was living it up and hiding her hands in the pockets of James's jacket, but she didn't want to go home. Something told her that she would meet her father today. The third church, which the young men had entered without success, was behind them. Tiredness took its toll, and Kate sighed heavily and said, "All right, James, let's continue the search another day. We'll have to meet my father tomorrow." At that moment, a bell rang nearby. The girl's whole body shook. "My God, I go to this church very often to pray. Is my father here? I haven't seen him once in 10 years. And he was right next door," Kate said, and tears streamed down her face. Her intuition was right. Her priests. Father Tickon said he worked for them. Similar in description and age to Kate's father. He couldn't remember his name, but he said to call him Michael. He guessed it. Or maybe he remembered. Kate whispered, "My name is Kate Mikhailovna. I'll call them now," promised the priest and disappeared behind the door. A few minutes later, a thin, stout man with a gray beard and eyes, as sad as Kate's, entered the church. He hesitantly took a few steps forward. Kate recognized him immediately. Her hands shook and her breath caught. In the next instant, she shouted "Father" and threw herself on his neck. Emotion flashed in the man's eyes, as if a distant memory had been revived. The man reached out a trembling hand and ran it through Kate's hair. The touch was both tentative and a deep, silent acknowledgement of feelings that words could not convey. "Are you my daughter?" Michael whispered in a hoarse voice. 10 years ago, he had lost his memory when he hit his head on the rocks after a fishing boat sank. But on some subconscious level, he was drawn to this town. It was a shame Kate hadn't felt it sooner, and Anna had passed away. When Michael found out about Anna, he couldn't hold back the tears and sobbed. After a few moments, Kate said, "Father, let's go to my place to live." James smiled and said, "Come and live with us." The man looked at Kate, and then at James, and realized that he had found a new life with the people he loved.